Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Closing the Loop, using iClicker and Launchpad to promote student success, given by our good friend at San Diego State University, Mark Laumakis. Really quickly, I want to introduce Mark and get us started, but I want to go over a few housekeeping items first. You guys all have been muted upon entry, but we love your thoughts. We love to hear them and your questions. So you have a questions panel down at the bottom and a chat panel that you can feel free to put questions in at any point during the webinar. We will be stopping at a couple of intervals to take questions, and Mark has an activity to get feedback from you guys. But if we don't get to them in those breaks, we will follow up after the webinar with your questions. And I think that's it for housekeeping. Allow me to introduce Mark Laumakis. Mark received his PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Southern California, but he found his true passion as a teacher and an avid user of educational technology. He emphasizes the use of technological tools that both solve pedagogical problems and help students learn. Mark has taught close to 30,000, that's a huge number, intro-psych students during his almost 20-year teaching career at San Diego State. And so today he's going to offer up his thoughts about closing the loop between what students are doing in class with in-class engagement versus what they're doing outside of class. So with further ado, I will hand it over to Mark, and thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. I assume everybody can hear me okay? Does the sound good?
I can hear you just fine.
Perfect. Well, welcome everyone to the webinar here, Closing the Loop. And as Lindsay said, I'm going to be talking about tools that I try to use to sort of bridge the gap between what students are doing in class with what I would like them to be doing outside of class. So as Lindsay said, I've been teaching here at SDSU for 19 years now, so almost 20 years. I've taught thousands upon thousands of students, and really sort of have found my niche since about 2005, 2006, and teaching larger sections of intro psych here. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my course, and then I want to start picking your brain a little bit about what challenges might arise in this kind of a course, and then we'll start talking about some possible solutions here. So thanks for being here. I know that I stand between some of you on the East Coast and maybe an early happy hour here on Friday afternoon, so I will be cognizant of the time, and I won't run over, and I'll let you get on with the rest of your day and your weekend, and hopefully that will be full of lots of fun stuff. So I'm going to begin by just sort of introducing you to my course structure, what things look like in my Psych 101 course. So I teach two 500 student sections of Psych 101 each fall and each spring. So I could potentially have up to 2,000 students per year. My enrollments have been running a little bit lower than 500 the last couple of semesters. What's always the case is I teach two sections. One is an 8 a.m. and the other is a 9:30. What's always true is the 9:30 section fills much, much more quickly than the 8 o'clock class. Students clearly like to sleep in. I've been teaching the course in this hybrid or blended learning format since about fall of 2006, and the model since fall of 2009 has been one where I teach, like this spring, on Tuesdays face-to-face in this large lecture hall. And my final bullet point here is about the fact that that is what real distance education looks like, the physical distance in that room. I don't think you really realize, and I don't get a good sense of it until I give tests. And on the day of the test, I walk all the way to the back row and realize how many bodies are in there and how small that really, really big screen behind me looks. So I am in that classroom, as I said, on Tuesdays at 8 and 9:30 this spring. And then on Thursdays, what we do is we share the classroom. So I'm paired up with two other courses here at SDSU, such that on Tuesdays when I'm in the classroom, they're online, and then on Thursdays we switch. And so yesterday, for example, I did a couple of live online sessions via Zoom, which is very similar to this GoToWebinar kind of product and other tools like that, where I'm basically teaching like I would in the face-to-face class online. One of the key things I would mention there about those online sessions is the sort of attendance in quotation marks is optional for students. That is, there are no points connected with their being there live. And so I record those sessions, and then within an hour or two afterwards, I get a recording link that I post into Blackboard, which is our learning management system here. And typically, in the live online sessions on Thursday, I will get something like, in the 500 student section, maybe 25 to 35 students live. So it's a small subsample of the total enrollment who actually choose to be there live on Thursdays. And then the rest of them are watching the recording, and I know they must be watching the recording, or the test grades would certainly not be what they are, and the distribution would have changed dramatically when I moved to this hybrid format, and that actually didn't happen. I'm going to stop at this point, and as you look at this picture in this classroom, and as you think about a class where, as an 18-year-old, you're required to show up on Tuesdays, but on Thursdays you're not necessarily required to show up, but you could, and you would have to log in and get online with the professor. I'm going to ask you what challenges might arise for an instructor who's teaching in this kind of a format. Obviously, there are some issues that are directly related to the size of the course, but what I'm going to ask you to do, and Lindsay's going to sort of play the moderator here, is chime into the chat box with some ideas that you have about the kinds of challenges that might arise for an instructor teaching that size of a course in that kind of a format. And again, with mostly 18-year-old freshmen. So what do you think might pop up here for the instructor that might cause him or her some challenges, if we want to put it nicely?
Okay,
So
and you can put into the chat or question box, and I'm just watching for responses.
cool.
And don't be shy.
Because I don't want to be one of those webinar leaders who just talks for the entire time and then stops and says bye-bye. So
Our good friend at Wisconsin, Eau Claire, Matt Evans, says apathy to the material.
apathy towards the material. Okay.
Monica Colby says you can't tell when students don't understand the information. Those that
That
don't understand don't speak up.
okay. So unaware of who doesn't understand. That's a really good one. Thank you for that one.
Yeah. Jason Thornley says the students will not show up.
What? Students don't show up?
Students don't skip class.
Okay.
Elizabeth Gurakak, hopefully I got your last name right, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, says students who are far from you probably feel disengaged and they might get distracted.
Students can be distracted.
And then we've got a couple more, and you just tell me when to stop saying these. Michelle says inability to quote unquote see when students do not understand.
Okay.
That's another unaware of who doesn't understand. Dorna Sakurai says keeping motivation up.
Good one. Okay.
And then we have another one, students are there, but they're not focused enough. So a lot around student focus, engagement, and
Okay.
motivation.
So focus, engagement, distractibility, right? Okay.
And last one, and then I'll let you move on.
Yeah.
Too much time between meetings.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. I'm not sure if I'm spelling distractibility right there. I'll use this. I'll use the suggested spelling there. And that last one was what again?
The last one was too much time between meetings.
Yeah. Let me talk about that one for just a second, because that's actually one of the bigger challenges with this design where, we're online on Thursdays and then we're face-to-face on Tuesdays, and I'm trying to move this around, it's not cooperating. What I tell the students is when we get together, so we just, yesterday talked about consciousness. So we talked about sleep, dreams, and drugs and alcohol. I did this really cool mouse party little demo. If you've never seen the mouse party from the University of Utah, you should definitely Google mouse party Utah. It's a weird thing to Google, but a really nice demonstration of what goes on at the synapse as people use different kinds of drugs and alcohol. What I'm trying to get to is now when I have them together again face-to-face on Tuesday, I'm assuming that they have either been there live or watched the recording of what we did on Thursday, right? So there will certainly be times where on Thursday we're doing, say, part one of the memory chapter, and then we get back together on Tuesday. Well, we're going to be doing part two. And when I do some clicker questions, this is sort of leading me right to where I want to go. What I realize is that early on in that Tuesday session, when we're back together face to face, when I do a couple clicker questions early, it's pretty clear there's a segment of the students who, as we're talking about here, haven't done what they're supposed to be doing in between, right? So the too much time between meetings is certainly something that I can resonate to. The other ideas also all tap right into the kinds of things that you struggle with. I think in any course, but particularly in a larger course that's only twice a week, things like that. The distractions are huge. I sort of feel like when we're face to face, or even when we're online, I'm sort of up against, whatever they're looking at on Instagram, or whatever cute kitten videos they're watching on YouTube, and that's a big challenge. The motivation piece, we could do 3 separate webinars on that, I'm sure. I don't know that we have a magic bullet for that, but that's certainly something that I see students struggle with, and I've tried to find ways to try to enhance that motivation for sure, but I don't think we have perfect solutions for that. So speaking of solutions, the next thing I want to ask you guys, and I promise I'm not going to make you do all the work today, is I'm curious to hear what kinds of solutions you might see to some of the problems we just identified. So we've got a nice long list of problems here. For you as the instructor, if you're teaching this kind of a course or something similar to it, and you're facing these kinds of challenges, what are some possible solutions that either you've tried or that you've heard about that you think might work? Where would you go to sort of problem solve some of these issues that we just raised?
We already have a response.
Excellent.
To reduce that big time between those meetings, I created a forum and discussions. Do you do the same with your students?
So forums and discussions, so outside of class, some interaction. Good, I like that.
Jason Thornley says attendance points and weekly assignments.
Attendance points, and if you say anything more, Jason, you're going to take over the rest of the presentation, because you are right on.
That's, yeah, giving away the next slide. Dorna says assigning student group projects.
Okay, I like that.
Okay.
Not sure I like it with 500 people, but I like the idea.
Jason's laughing at you, by the way. Entry and exit tickets, participation points for answering clicker questions.
Okay.
Having assignments
They said
on.
exit
Oh,
tickets?
sorry.
Exit tickets?
Entry and exit tickets, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Not sure what that means. Okay. If somebody could say more about that, whoever suggested that, I'd like to hear more.
That is Michelle, if you can add more to that. We've got another one, Matt Evans, having assignments on the off days keeps them engaged.
Okay.
Think, pair, share activities.
Isn't that always an answer? Think, pair, share? That's like it's always a good answer.
Alongside assignments outside of class, there are, assigning online quizzes.
Your voice went all like robotic on me. I lost you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Assigning online quizzes.
Ah, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. Giving them an assignment between class or something to show participation that's due maybe 2 days before the next meeting.
Okay. So assignments are due in between meetings.
And I'm sure Michelle is going to follow up on the entry and exit tickets, but I haven't seen it yet, so I won't hold you up.
Cool. Well, these are good ideas. We clearly have a lot of smart people in here who've got some experience tackling these kinds of problems. So what I'm going to share with you is just some ideas for what I try to do to sort of bridge this gap between what we're doing face-to-face and what they're doing outside of class. I certainly don't suggest that I have all the solutions, but I think what's interesting about my perspective on this is not only do I have this position where I teach in the Department of Psychology, but I've got this other weird sort of half-time position in our instructional technology services area where I do a lot of faculty development work. And so I have had the benefit of learning lots of cool ideas similar to a lot of what you've written on the slide here now, for solving different kinds of problems. So in that position in ITS, they call it faculty in residence. It sounds more grandiose than it really is. I do a lot of work with folks who are moving to hybrid or fully online courses, and they're trying to find ways, to not only keep students engaged, but also try to enhance success in those online courses, or hybrid courses. So my pool, I guess what I'm trying to say is my pool of suggestions and ideas doesn't just come from my own experience, but also from lots of other really smart, hardworking folks here that I've worked with, man, over the past now 12 or 13 years, quite a while. So I'm going to go to my next slide, and I want to make it full screen again here, this sort of slideshow mode. One of the things that has sort of really impacted me over the last half dozen years or so, and I forget when this book was first published, I know Thaler subsequently won the Nobel Prize for some of the ideas here, is this idea of a nudge. I think for what we do as teachers, for what we do as human beings, for what you want to do to try to get other people in your lives to be more successful, to do things that are good for them, this nudge idea is fantastic. So I'm not going to read the definition over there. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. My wife just yesterday said, my son, who's a sophomore in college, mentioned that they're reading the nudge book that Dad bought for me and tried to make me read, towards the end of high school. And he didn't really do it at that point, but he luckily had the book in hand. So the idea of the nudge is to sort of design environments, they call it choice architecture, so that people will end up doing the things that will ultimately lead to success. And that success could be, for example, in saving for retirement, right? So it used to be at most companies that with respect to investing for retirement, you would have to opt in to have them take money out of your paycheck to save for long-term goals like retirement. Now, many companies are going towards a nudge influence approach where you have to opt out. That money is going to come out and go into your retirement pile unless you say, no, I don't want to do that. There are similar examples in the book around states that have moved or countries that have moved towards making organ donation an opt-out. So you're automatically an organ donor unless you explicitly say, I don't want to do that, versus the alternative, which is an opt-in. And what you get is participation rates for the retirement savings or for the organ donation that jump dramatically, okay? So it's not a 100% perfect fit for what I'm going to be talking about, but I like this idea of designing environments that will facilitate success, right? And I think what I tried to do over the years in my Psych 101 course, whether it's the online portion or the face-to-face portion, is build things in to help my students be successful. And effectively what I tell them is the course is set up so that you are going to be rewarded for doing the things that will help you learn. And what I'm going to talk about is two major tools that I use to try to help them learn. So for in-class engagement, I use iClicker. I'm a little bit old school with the iClicker usage in my course in that I use the remotes. I'm not yet moving towards having them use the mobile app, but I may be going in that direction at some point. So things do change over time. And then for outside of class, what I use is, in particular, the learning curve quizzes. So down below here, you can see an example of one of these quiz questions. So in Launchpad from Macmillan, I have out-of-class engagement sort of checked off by having students complete pretty much weekly learning curve quizzes. My setup basically is there's a set of learning curve quizzes for a given chapter due on Sunday night if we completed that chapter during the week, right? So actually this week, my students have 2 chapters worth of learning curve quizzes to complete, because on Tuesday, we finished up the section on sensation and perception. And yesterday we did in one day the section on consciousness. So I told them, hey, you have not just 1, but 2 sets of your quizzes to do this week. So all I'm going to do in the remaining 10 or 15 minutes here is walk through how I use iClicker, how I use the learning curve quizzes to hopefully nudge students towards success, to minimize the potential problems that they might have in a course with this design. And hopefully it'll yield some ideas that you could maybe steal and run with yourself. So I'm going to do most of the talking for the final 10 or 15 minutes, but then I certainly want to make sure we have time to walk through some questions that you guys might have. So on the iClicker front, basically my approach is a pretty typical one where I use the clickers to provide them what I call concept check questions. And you can call these whatever you want to call them, but they're effectively questions that give you a sense of what students are understanding or not understanding. And I think this maps right onto a couple of the challenges that you guys helped to identify a little while ago, right? You're not sure who's getting it or not getting it. You're not sure if they understand or not. And my sort of journey towards using clickers in general and iClicker in particular really was driven by the fact that when you teach a really large face-to-face class, what you'll notice is that when you stop and say, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody need any further clarification or maybe another example? You know what the students do? Their eyes go down and no one will look at you. So as you're standing there as the instructor, you may think, well, I've done a good job. I've explained this well. I've given them some good examples. They understand it. You don't really know until you do maybe one of these kinds of concept check questions. So I just pulled in one literally right before we got started this morning, so that you would have a sense of how you might use these. So maybe you just got done teaching the basics of classical conditioning, and you want to see if they understand discrimination or stimulus discrimination. So you give this one where it gives them different scenarios where maybe it's discrimination, maybe it's generalization. Obviously, for the psychology people here, the correct answer to this one will be A, right? So we've got the dog distinguishing between the sound of the can opener and the sound of the blender, right? I respond to one and not to the other, okay? It's a good example of how you get a sense of what they're understanding or not understanding. So typically what I'm looking for is, correct response rates of 70, maybe 80% or more, right? If I have a problem or I have a question where, only 45% of them get it right, and maybe there's like another 40% who are stuck on another distractor choice, maybe what I'll do is one of the other things that I do here with clickers, maybe I'll turn that into a peer instruction question. I won't reveal the correct answer after that first administration. And what I'll do is give them an opportunity. This is sort of like the think, pair, share idea, right? I'm going to give them the opportunity to discuss that question with the folks around them. I walk around and listen in. I try to hear the words that they're using to explain, say, discrimination. And then I'll stop that conversation. I'll re-ask the question. And what you see in those scenarios is this incredible migration towards the correct answer. So that's a peer instruction approach. It sort of pairs together with the concept check questions. Again, especially when you are stumbling upon a question where students maybe aren't understanding it like maybe you thought they would. I do demonstrations with iClicker as well. This is probably most common in the section on memory. So I really love teaching the serial position effect. And you could put in the little sort of tilted U-shaped curve with primacy effect and recency effect. You could pull it right from the textbook, but I think it really brings it to life if you do that demonstration with them live in the classroom. So I'll read them a list of 18 words, and I'll have them, then try to recall as many as they can. And then it's their own data, right? So basically, I'll ask them to respond with a clicker about their, remembering correctly the first word, and then a couple of the middle words, and then a couple of the words at the end, and we sort of generate our own graph via the iClicker responses. I'll do anonymous polling, ask them their opinions on things. I will, ask them to, tell me the degree to which they think something is more driven by nature or nurture, things like that. Certainly you can do more of that in like an abnormal psychology class, for sure. Predicting outcomes, I do a fair amount of that in the section on social psychology, where I have them sort of, tell me what they think is going to happen in the ASH experiment or maybe in Milgram's study about obedience. So that's a nice way to do it as well. And I do actually generate attendance points. Someone mentioned that as an idea for increasing engagement and maybe addressing some of the challenges in this kind of a course. And I do generate attendance points. So my approach with attendance points is I give them 5 points for each day of attendance where they're there face to face and they have answered at least all of the questions but one. So in a typical class, I'll ask 3 or 4 clicker questions. So let's say I've asked 4. To be eligible for the attendance points for that class session, you have to have answered at least 3 of them. And the iClicker software will do this automatically. You can pull it out of the software and inject it into Blackboard or whatever your learning management system is. And what I love about the attendance points is that it gives me some information about my students that I wouldn't otherwise have in a class of this size. And what I also do with the attendance points is I share with my students this rundown of what the grade distribution looks like at different levels of the attendance points in the course. And to make a long story short, they can get 40 points of attendance over the course of the semester. And if you look at the grade distribution across the table here, you see the grade distribution when students get all the attendance points, or 7/8 or 3/4, versus the overall grade distribution down here at the bottom. And what I tell them on day 1 is that if you show up all the time, it is very, very difficult to get a D or an F in the class. Okay. I also mentioned, hey, there are third variables involved here, right? It's a nice way to be able to talk about third variables or compounds and say, you know, the kids who show up all the time probably are doing other things that are responsible for the fact that they're not getting D's or F's. Okay. What I love most of all, though, is all the red over here. And I basically tell them this black line is the point of no return. If you will not commit to coming to class at least 3/4 of the time, it is going to be virtually impossible for you to get an A, right? 25% of my students in this semester's grade distribution had A's. None of those 25% failed to come to class at least 3/4 of the time, okay? And it's not just math, right? It's not that you're losing so many points that mathematically you can't get an A, because if you were down here, this is 15 points out of 700, right? So that's 2% of your grade. So you would max out at like a 98. So there's still plenty of room for you to get an A or even an A minus, but it doesn't happen. So I teach them about showing up matters. I put on my dad hat for a minute and say, you know, I think in general in life, showing up matters. And people who show up are probably going to be more successful than people who don't. So before I start down that long rant, I'm going to stop here and see, do you have any questions for me at all about my use of iClicker in the face-to-face part of my course?
Yeah, so apologies, Stephen Widener says, oh, this is a good question. So how seriously do you consider the issue of students who might bring in their friend's clicker into your class and answer for them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it happens. The way I'm able to sleep at night and not worry about that too much is partly because I have a lot of other things to worry about, but it's a small part of their grade, right? So the clicker points overall represent 100 out of 700 points in the course, so it's about 14 or 15%. I think that, you know, that ultimately will come out in the wash, right? So if I gave Lindsay my clicker and never went to class, when I show up to take the test, I'm probably not going to do particularly well. I don't really actively try to police it, and I'm sure it's probably happening more in the back of the room than in the front of the room, right? You know, the guy sitting there with 6 clickers on his lap. I haven't seen any super egregious violations of that, but I do tell them that you're not allowed to do that, and if I catch you doing that, there are going to be consequences. So I think it happens. I don't think it happens to a big enough degree that I'm really worried about. So the way I would gauge it is, you know, in my 8 o'clock class this spring, I know I have 140 kids enrolled, and I know when I'm doing clicker questions, I'm getting 100 to 110-ish responses. So I can look out and say, does that look like 100, 110 people? It's pretty close. If it's not exactly that number, it's pretty close, and I don't worry about it too much. But certainly it can be an issue with the use of clickers.
All right, and then Jason Thornley asked, so do you only use the clicker once in a while or weekly? I think he's asking if you use it in every face-to-face class.
Yeah, so definitely in every face-to-face class meeting. And as I said, on average, it works out to probably 3 or 4 questions per class. And what I like about the questions is not only do we get the feedback, right? I learn if they're understanding or not. They learn, probably even more importantly, whether they're understanding or not. But it also gives me a chance to break things up, right? It helps me move away from me just talking nonstop at them for 75 minutes. It's a nice way to sort of shift gears. I use other tools in Launchpad, including videos and simulations and demonstrations to move away from just 75 minutes straight of me lecturing. So I might show them a nice little demonstration of what goes on at the synapse as neurotransmitters are binding to receptor sites. I could put up a static figure of that from the textbook, but when I jump in and show them, that demonstration in Launchpad, that brings that to life, and again moves me away from just doing a lot of talking at them for the entire time.
All right, and do we have time for one more question? How do you monitor anonymous polling? Do you know how many students participate in anonymous polling?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, it's always doing that frequency count in the corner as the responses are coming in. Obviously, when we're doing the anonymous polling, I'm not tracking that for points or anything. But if there are controversial issues that maybe you want to have them have a chance to chime in about, I don't use anonymous polling a whole lot, but I certainly could see, and I used to teach abnormal a fair amount too. I could certainly see doing even more with that in like an abnormal psych class. But it's something that can be done. As I said, I don't do it a ton, but it's available.
Okay, and then we did get clarification on the entry tickets and exit tickets, but we can go over that at the end. So
cool. That sounds great. I'll run through what I'm going to talk about here about Launchpad, and then we'll go to those final questions, because I know there could be an early happy hour on the horizon for some of you on the East Coast. I'm a little jealous. How I use Launchpad in the course is as the online hub for the course. So when students get into Launchpad, they have access to the full ebook. So what I like about Launchpad and my use of it is it guarantees that every student has the book, right? I don't need to worry about whether they have the book or not. They've got to be in Launchpad to do the quizzing, so I know they've got the textbook. The demonstrations I just mentioned in passing, I regularly use that one about what's going on with neurocommunication at the synapse as neurotransmitters are binding to receptor sites. There are different simulations that you can actually assign to have students do. I don't do additional assignments outside of the learning curve quizzes, but certainly in smaller classes, I think it would be fantastic to do that. I'm just worried about sort of overloading them with lots of assignments and then having to deal with people forgetting to do them and trying to set and reset those in terms of due dates and things. I would mention here, just as I think of that, one rule that I have on the learning curve quizzes, and I'm going to talk more about them in a second, is that I basically tell them they're never made available again after the due date. So whatever the issue is that kept you from getting them done on time, even if you email me about it, I'm going to say, I'm going to begin an email response that begins with the word unfortunately. It's going to say, I'm not going to reopen those. What I do recommend with the learning curve quizzes, and actually the clicker points as well, is gathering more points than you're ultimately going to count. So with the clickers, we will use them because we're only face-to-face once a week, and then we give tests 4 times out of the 15 weeks. Really, there are 11 face-to-face instructional days. So I gather 11 days worth of clicker data, but I only end up counting 8 of them. So I do a random draw of the 8 that will count, make sure that adds up to 100 points. That's done, right? So there's more available than will ultimately count. So if you forget your clicker, it's not going to torpedo your grade. In a similar way with the quizzes here, I assigned 13 chapters of the quizzes, and to get all the points, you simply need to complete 12 of those chapters. So if you go to visit grandma and she doesn't have any internet connectivity, and you can't get the quizzes done, well, that will be the one that you can skip. And if you do everything else that's left in the course for these learning curve quizzes, you'll get all the points. So the learning curve quizzes for me really are essential for closing the loop between what we're doing in class, whether that's face-to-face or online, and their homework, right? It gets them to do what they otherwise might not do. I have some interesting data about the average number of hours a students self-report working on a course outside of class, and the number was astoundingly low. When we did this about 5 years ago, they self-reported an average of 1 hour of work outside of class. When you backed out class attendance, they were self-reporting on average 1 hour per week. Okay, so if you think about that, that's the average, right? The mean, the median and the mode were probably 0. So this is me designing an environment to nudge them towards some kind of engagement with the course content outside of class. And what I love as much as anything is the fact that the learning curve quizzes really do help facilitate retrieval practice. I use the analogy of a batting cage, and I say whether it's softball or baseball, one of the ways you get to get better at hitting is you get in the cage and you hit baseballs or you hit softballs. Well, one of the ways you get better at intro psych is you get in the cage and you sit there and you answer questions about the course content. And so I use that as a way to really emphasize the importance of retrieval practice. It's what learning science is showing is probably the very best thing they can do to help them learn. So lots of practice with the quizzes. And I tell them, even after the due date has passed, the questions are still there. They can continue doing them to practice further retrieval practice. They're not going to get any points for the course for it, but it's certainly going to help them in terms of preparation for the test. So I'm not going to go into a full demo of Learning Curve. If there's something you're wanting to see with that, I could jump out and show you, but I don't necessarily feel like I need to go into the nuts and bolts of how that works. I want to get to my final slide to summarize, hopefully, a few takeaways from this that you might find helpful, and then we'll see what final questions you have. So formative quizzing in general, and that's really what both the iClicker usage and the Learning Curve usage in my course represents, is really, really valuable. This low stakes formative assessment is valuable and easy to do. I talk this talk constantly in my faculty development work about moving more towards lower stakes, more frequent assessments. So I do that via iClicker when we're in the classroom. I do it with the students via Learning Curve quizzes each week. The quizzing certainly helps to close the loop, to connect what they're doing inside of class with what they're doing outside of class. I've got data showing how the quizzing in particular with Learning Curve promotes student success. So going back, man, it's got to be 8 or 9 years ago now, when I first moved to the Learning Curve quizzes, I assigned them in one section, and I assigned the old sort of post-chapter quizzes to another section. There was no random assignment, I will admit, but the students who were doing the Learning Curve quizzes had an overall course grade that was a half to 2/3 of a letter grade better. And probably best of all, they were answering 3 times as many questions as they were with the old style end of chapter quizzing that I was doing. So I was sold immediately on that. It was a way to guarantee, here's the nudge, right? It was a way to guarantee more time on task by adopting those Learning Curve quizzes. And the final bullet point here that I'll end with is the quizzing really helps you learn about where your students are. That was one of the things a lot of you resonated to as a challenge, right? Not knowing whether they're getting it or not. The iClicker questions on the spot tell you where they are, what they're understanding or not understanding. The Learning Curve quizzes certainly tell you that as well. And I would also mention that both of these strategies, especially in a large class like mine, tell you something about the student when you're trying to total up that final course grade, right? So I could have 2 students with identical course totals who maybe are just short of, let's say, an A-, and the first student has all of the Learning Curve points and 99 out of 100 clicker points, and the other student has the exact same total, but has 70 clicker points and did half of the Learning Curve assignments, had outrageously high test scores. Well, if I'm going to bump one of those students up to an A-, it's probably going to be the student who on that profile from the iClicker points and the Learning Curve points was doing what I really wanted them to do. I know you could argue, well, that's not fair, blah, blah, blah. My point I'm trying to make, I guess, is these strategies with iClicker and Learning Curve give me some insight into my students that really in a class of this size, I would not otherwise have. And I think that's really, really valuable. So my final slide is the obligatory question slide where I Googled, question and grabbed the best image popped up. So there it is.
We have so many questions. Okay, we'll try to get through as many of these as possible.
Sure.
Really quickly, though, Michelle responded on entry and exit tickets. it's formative assessment, and she sets it up where there are minimum content questions students have to be able to answer before coming to class. They can take the quiz multiple times, and it can be an online quiz, discussion post, or clicker question. Um, for the first few meetings, she actually does ask students to leave if they don't have the content knowledge. After that, students make sure they get it. So you can do the same at the end of class before they leave. As they earn their exit tickets, they can then use them for points on exam, homework passes, etc. So that's
I
really
love it. That
interesting.
sounds like that should be a whole nother webinar.
Yeah, it totally should. Michelle, you should get up with me and we can do a webinar on that.
I love
Um,
that.
okay, so Sandy Woodruff has a fun question. Do you ever allow your students to use the iClicker to ask you questions? I know they have, short alphanumeric feature on the iClicker remotes, and then you can ask questions on the app as well. But do you ever have students do that?
I don't. I like the idea. I'm thinking that that would be screaming in my mind to move towards the mobile solution, because it's a lot easier to do that than on the remote. What I would say is, in the context of the online session that I run via Zoom, this is not really a clicker related thing, but in those online sessions, I do notice with that small subset of 25 out of 500 there, I get more and better questions from them in those online sessions, because I think it's a little less intimidating, like you guys are doing right now, right? If you're asking questions, you're typing something into the chat box. It's a little less intimidating than raising your hand in a class full of 400 to 500 people. And I think the other thing that's strange about that as well, in terms of this, I was joking about the distance in the classroom. I've had students actually report that the connection with me in the online session is better than it is in the face-to-face class, because I think part of that is when, let's say, Susie asks a question in the chat box, I'll say, okay, so Susie is asking ... right? If it's a face-to-face class, I probably don't know Susie's name. So when she raises her hand, unless I'm, nice enough to ask her name first, I'm going to answer her question, but I'm not going to be really addressing her directly. Does that make sense? It's kind of an odd scenario to say you feel closer to the instructor when he's talking to you through the computer, but for some of the students, it seems like that's the case.
Okay, we have a few more questions. We'll go over to a quizzing question. How many points do you assign to the learning curve quizzes?
Fantastic. So like I said, I assign 13 chapters and I count up to 12 of the chapters. And the way I do it is I make the learning curve quizzes have a point value that's equivalent to the 4 tests that I give them. So basically I tell them the learning curve quizzes are like test number 5. And guess what? All of you should have a perfect score on that test number 5, because to get all those points, all you have to do is sit there and keep answering questions until you reach the target score for each of those assigned learning curve quizzes. So the mathematics of it is it's 120 out of 700. So I'm going to pull up my calculator because I can't do that one in my head. It looks like it's 17% of their course grade. So it's about 1/6-ish of their course grade.
Okay, and then we had someone ask about if this recording will be available. Absolutely, we will follow up by Monday at the latest with the
It's going to
recording.
be trending on YouTube within the
It's going to
next hour.
be exactly. We're going to make this happen. Okay, and then I'm going to combine kind of 2 questions about student feedback on iClicker. Um, do you get any student feedback on using iClickers in your class, and do you have any data about the number of students who are reviewing outside of class and how many questions they're using in one setting? So sorry, that was a question about iClicker on the first on student feedback, and then data about students who are doing the reviews outside of class.
Okay, I'll remember the first one, and you're probably going to have to tell me
Okay,
the second one the second
that's
time.
fine.
I haven't relatively recently asked for feedback with the clickers, about the clickers, but when we first got started using clickers years ago, we did that every single semester, and the feedback was almost uniformly positive. What they said more than anything, and this is my lived experience as the instructor, is the use of the clickers makes it so that they show up. And so that's one major impact, is students will be much more likely to show up. I have a colleague in econ who said, but the sort of negative side effect is, if you are speaking really bluntly, it makes some students show up who you might otherwise rather didn't show up, right? So they're not particularly engaged. They're sitting in the back, they're reading a newspaper, and they're pressing the clicker every once in a while to make sure they get their point. So there is that to be aware of. But the short answer to the question about their their feedback about the clickers is it's almost uniformly positive. I haven't had any pushback about the cost of it or any of those sorts of things. I think they view it as a useful tool in a class of this size. And I think it's important that on day one that you explain to them why you're doing it, right? Anytime you use something like clickers, if you give them that rationale on the front end, right? If I put this slide up, I don't know how you couldn't be convinced that, like, okay, this clicker thing is going to make me show up, and when you show up, things go a lot better than if you don't. I would buy in after seeing those numbers. I'm not sure that all of them look incredibly closely at those numbers with me, but I think if you give the rationale, they definitely buy in. The second question was what?
Okay, so the second question was on learning curve quizzing. That Cindy
Yeah,
Albert, correct me if I'm wrong, if I believe this is about learning curve. Do you have any data about the number of students who are reviewing questions outside of class and how many questions they're using in one setting? So you know how learning curve will tally per student how many
yeah.
questions they went through to get to their target score. Is that something you look at?
I'll be brutally honest and say I haven't, but I know that I could. If I was teaching 35 to 40 students, I would definitely be looking at that. And that question actually makes me think, you know what I should do when students come to office hours, which is super rare now. I don't know if you guys are experiencing that too, but seems to be super rare. If they're struggling, that's certainly one of the things that I could sort of lift the hood up and look at within Launchpad, right? I could see, not only are they getting those points, but like, are they answering lots and lots of questions? Are they maybe going back in after the quizzes were due and continuing to practice? Because that will tell you a lot about, back to the question about motivation, right? That would speak to motivation if they're in there and, banging away on the questions and continuing to practice even after the due date has gone by. That would be valuable information. So I haven't done a lot, but that question, I just learned something today that I should probably take that approach when they're coming to office hours and dig around a little more, because they're leaving. We always call this in instructional technology services, they're leaving a lot of digital breadcrumbs, right? When they're doing what they're doing here in Launchpad, when they're doing what they're doing with clickers, they're leaving a vapor trail of where they've been and what they've been doing or not doing. And I think any of that you can leverage to help them going forward is really, really valuable.
Okay, and then we've got two more questions. How long do you make the learning curve quizzes available for the students? I know you said
Your sound cut out again. You
oh,
went
I'm sorry.
all like robotic.
When do you make the learning curve quizzes available to students, and how long before the class that it's due for?
Could you say that again, Lindsay? You cut out. At least on my end, you cut out, and I couldn't hear
I
most of
am
it.
so sorry. It's these
That's all right.
headphones.
It's
Um,
probably my stupid connection here.
how long do you make the learning curve quizzes available to students?
Oh,
So how far out from class?
great question. I literally have all of the chapters available beginning on day one. And then here's part of the nudge. I have them due on that Sunday night after we finish a chapter to sort of force them into doing more distributed practice, right? When I was a newbie and had a lot less gray hair back in 2001, thereabouts, I used to make them all available until the night before the test. We don't need to chime into the chat box to answer the question of when did they do them all? They did them all the night before the test. So I learned over time to sort of spread them out. I tell them I'm making you do distributed practice by having, well, like this coming Sunday, 2 chapters worth of quizzes due. So they're all available on day one. I don't really typically have any students who go and do like all of them at once. And then they disappear as we get closer to the test. And then for the final chapter that we cover before the test, I actually leave that one available until the night before the test. So this spring, my tests are on Tuesday. So rather than being due on Sunday night, that last chapter before the test, I make due on Monday night at 11. And the idea is I'm sort of, again, trying to nudge them towards moving towards using those learning curve quizzes as part of their final preparation for the test. So I feel like it's a way to sort of, again, nudge them towards doing the things that will help them learn.
All right, and then one more question. How much time do you spend in class um, administering and answering iClicker questions?
Great question. You always give up some time, right? If you go away from just lecturing, so you're gonna, necessarily give up some instructional time. I would say with, let's say I did 4 questions today. That I give them a minute for each question. So the setup and sort of talking about the question, the administering the question, and looking at the results, it's probably 2 minutes per question. So I would say over that class session, maybe I'm giving up 8 minutes out of 75 minutes. So I'm giving up, maybe 10% of the time. I think it's 100% worth it. I think we are overly obsessed with covering content, and I'd rather cover less content and know that they understand that material than just try to have them drink from a fire hose and keep lecturing at them for 75 minutes straight. So it does cost some time, but once you develop some facility with the software, super easy to use. It just works. I'm not trying to sell it to you, but it just works. It does what it's supposed to do, and that wasn't always the case with other clicker systems we had used previously. So I really, really like it.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. I would just like to recap and say a huge thank you, Mark, for coming in and talking about how you keep your classroom engaged and close that loop. Thank you to everyone who was able to join today. Thank you for your engagement and all of your really great questions. And thank you for the thank yous coming in. We're going to be following up with the recording, like I said, by Monday. So if you registered for the webinar, you will get a link to the recording. Feel free to forward it along to a colleague if you'd like. The recording's just up on a website open for anybody to view at any time.
Nice.
So that's all we have, and thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Mark.
Sure.